Okay, so Anna said that she's made hand-built lids. The other class is making lidded forms at this point as well. And the main criteria for a lidded form is to have it fit tightly, no movement. So whether you're hand building or throwing a jar with a lid, there should be no movement between pot and lid. So for instance, this pot, too loose. You would say that this does not fit, it's too loose. Okay? You want it to be really tight, no movement. Okay, so, in hand building, this failed. That's why it's still here. Okay, so that's what we want to do. No movement. One way to establish that, or your first step in having the lid fit the piece, is having the lid and the piece thrown from the same type of clay. Not like this fresh log that I got out of one barrel and then I go over there where all the sloppy reclaim is and then I start throwing lids out of that wet sloppy reclaim. What would be the problem there?
Different consistencies would expand and contract different.
Right, different consistencies. One log, I assume, is going to be drier than the wet sloppy reclaim, right? So inconsistencies, which means they're going to dry at different rates. And we want them to be made of the same type of clay because we're going to measure the opening. We're going to measure the opening of the jar so that we can make the lid that size. And if one is shrinking at a different rate than the other, then all that measurement's going to be for nothing. Okay? So this, you have to get a little technical with this one. We're actually going to be measuring the openings with this tool called calipers. You won't have to buy them. I will hang them up here. Be courteous, wash them when you're done, and rehang them up there. Okay? So, then if we want to break it down further, two types of jars would accommodate a lid. A jar such as this, without a ledge, it's just a straight lip, or a jar that has a ledge upon which the lid would sit. Okay? So like I said, I used to have a set of jars for demonstration purposes, and all the lids were interchangeable, and it was a great way to show you how it all works. And one semester I sat down and looked up here to get my tray of 5 jars with interchangeable lids, and it was like, oh, stolen. To this day, I still look up there thinking they're going to miraculously appear. Okay, so there's lots of issues that we're going to want to avoid, like cracks. This big old crack here. We've talked about cracks on the bottoms of the floors of mugs and pitchers and bowls. And so we're going to learn how to avoid all of that. Okay, so 2 types of jars. One without a ledge, one with a ledge. I obviously do not have to throw a jar without a ledge, right, for you. So what I will do is quickly throw a base that has a ledge. So I've got my clay, and by throwing the lid and the jar from the same wedged piece of clay, that will ensure, that's step 1 for making the lid fit. Okay? Ask questions along the way, but If I were you, I would take copious notes. Cone it up, push it down. Always keeping your bat clean so you know where to start your hand so that you bring the entire mass up and down. Create a general hockey puck shape. Now for your bowls, you know, if you were doing a lower, wider bowl, then this is going to be a little flatter. If you're doing a more upright mixing bowl, it's going to be more, it's not, the hockey puck form will be a little more raised up, not so flat. Just looking at some of the bowls over there, one bit of advice, the bowl should look, if you look at the inside and then you look at the outside, they should look like they're the same form, not two different forms, okay? So maybe on the inside it sort of comes to a point, but on the outside it's a little more squarish. That means you didn't trim enough away on the foot. Okay, so the inside and the outside should look the same. Alright, so we're just going to make a quick little jar here. Compress the floor. Pop any air bubbles. Remember on your bowls, because you're leaving extra clay at the bottom to create a foot, you have to compress all the more, right? Because there's more clay, whoops, to compress. Got a disintegrating sponge here. Now you'll need your right angle rib this time. Everybody has one of these, right? Okay. The bigger the floor, the more you have to compress it. But also, the thicker the floor, the more you have to compress it. This crack was due to either lack of compression or the clay was too thick. Not quite sure what. It's been a good example piece. Okay, so my first pull, I don't usually make a wedge. Then after that first pull, I do. So think cone rather than cylinder, and it won't go out on you. Now I'm going to keep this lip deliberately thick because I have to make a ledge. So I need extra clay here to create that ledge. So I'm keeping it pretty thick. Got a ruler, have a Okay, see, when you don't have the right tools, you just can't throw. Trying to figure out where all my... You almost see how, not deliberately, but a ledge is almost occurring already. Do you see that? I didn't try to do that. Basically, I'm trying to keep it flat and thick. And if it's uneven, I would definitely trim it, compress it, trim it before you make the ledge. Okay, simple little jar form. So I'm going to make all the different kinds of lids that fit on a ledge that fit this jar. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, this ledge is flat. It's slanting in a little bit, sort of naturally did that. Okay, so what I'm going to do with my right angled rib is while the wheel's spinning, I'm going to hold it halfway across the lip and gently push down, 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 down to make this ledge. So this ledge was originally part of this lip, fatter lip. Holding this, you think you have to hold this steady and still? Yes, ma'am. Halfway down, 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 down to push. So essentially you're pushing half the lip down to make a ledge. Okay? Gonna remember this? Have a better memory than I do. All right, ready? Get close. Just find your way first. So I'm holding the rib halfway across the lip. Notice my elbows right away get anchored in my rib cage. I am holding this rib with all 5 fingers for stability. But I'm also grabbing it with the 5 fingers of my other hand. So actually 10 fingers are grabbing this rib. And my elbows are anchored in my rib cage. Just like when you're trying to find the center to open up the hockey puck shape. You know, just come in here and find your way. Find the halfway point. Then gently start pushing down. You do want to recess it somewhat. You do not, it's not good etiquette to have the lid equal to the lip, or obviously never higher. It should be down, nestled in that little nest of a ledge. Okay? So you want to recess this down Now, see, when you're not careful, you might totally deform the outside. So you have to watch it. If you didn't leave yourself enough room, enough clay, what also might happen is while you're pushing down on that ledge, it just sort of rips right off because you just didn't leave enough clay there. Okay. Now that's a little wide. That ledge is a little wide. It really only needs to be this wide. So I'm actually going to go in there with my needle and just trim a ring of it off because that's just too wide. The little curve on the underside of the lid, that little bulbous curve actually fits inside that circle, that opening. So it doesn't really need to be that big. So I'm just going to cut it off. So that's better than not having enough clay and having it just rip off. Okay, so I just cut half of it off, just like you're trimming a lip. Okay, and that's the perfect ledge. Now, make note of this, note takers. Well, round this lip just like you would any lip. You don't want to have the lip of the vessel now straight up, and by all means not tilted in, because what happens if there's any warpage during the firing, during the morphing of the clay body, during vitrification, it could shrink in and grab the lid, and then you can't get the lid out. So to avoid that, we take the right angle rib and we just tilt that out. Okay? See what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Yes, no, maybe? It does. Okay. Always have the dot, the colored dot of your bat match up the black mark on the wheel. Still has that nasty little marking there. These lights are casting shadows. It's hard to... Okay. There's your ledge. The lip is tilted out. Do not have it straight. Do not have it hugging in. Does that make sense? Okay, now, do not go to lunch. Do not leave. Do not come back. Do not say, I'll throw the lid later. Do not do any of the above. You must measure this opening now, because right now this is starting to shrink because it's going to start losing moisture, right? So you have to get the measurement now because you're going to be throwing the lid with the wet clay that you threw the jar with. This is something you should write down in your notebook now. To measure the opening, these calipers, they open up and they close and crisscross. So to measure this opening, you crisscross the calipers. So if you're taking notes on the lid variation notebook, the handout, for the two on the left, curved inset lid, recessed knob lid, you see they both have ledges. So you might want to write, measure the opening of the jar with the calipers crisscrossed. Now, where do we measure it? The absolute diameter. Dead on diameter. Sometimes I have to stand up to find it. And you crisscross them, they move. Now, it's not a precise piece of equipment. You know, look, there's clay all over the little knob, but that's why we have a notebook, which we'll explain in a minute. So, find the diameter. Now, are we machines that we're going to find the exact diameter of this circle? No. So therefore, if you move the wheel a few different places and make adjustments, then you know, okay, yeah, here's the diameter. I need to open it a little bit. Okay, here it is. Measured it. I measured it like in 6 spots. Then you take this, because these are not precise pieces of equipment. They move just by looking and breathing on them. Take a piece of paper, a sharp pencil, make a line, hold the caliper down, and put the marking on your paper. I draw a little picture of what jar it is. But when it comes to lids, even the thickness of the pencil line can affect the fit. I mean, we're talking about really tiny measurements here, and for preciseness. So, very sharp pencil. We have a pencil sharpener over there under the chalkboard. Sharpen your pencil. Here's the other thing. Don't be putting a single piece of paper on the stool next to you, which has a concave surface, because the paper's going to bend and crunch, mold itself into that concavity. Is that a word? Concavity? It is now. And that's going to skew your measurement. So you see, I'm on a pad, on a clipboard, put a bat on the stool next to you, so that the paper is staying dead on flat when you're making that measurement. It all affects the fit of the lid. All of these steps I'm going to give you along the way. Now, if you're like me, you're going to be throwing and you're going to get slip all over this paper. And then what's going to happen? It's going to all crinkle up. And that's going to skew the fit too, because now I've got my measurement. So now when I go to make the lid, here's the deal. I'm going to now open the calipers. I'm going to measure that. I've got to put it down to measure it. Open calipers, you might want to write that down. Open your calipers to get the measurement of the lid, so that when you throw the lid, you know it's got to be that wide. Okay, so crisscross the calipers when you're measuring the opening of the jar. Open the calipers when you're throwing the lid. With me? Okay. I am not going to cut this jar off yet. Okay, so just make note of that. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm not going to cut it yet. Colored dot with the number 1. Okay, we will throw the recessed knob first. That's this. There, the knob is sort of recessed in this little nest. Okay, they can be a variety of sizes. And the knob, you're actually throwing the knob and the lid at the same time in one piece. Whereas all the other ones, you can hand build a knob, you can pull a handle for a knob, you can actually, carve one out if you leave extra clay. There's a variety of ways to make your knobs. With the recessed knob lid, the knob is thrown all in one. It's actually thrown first, you'll see in a second, and then the lid is thrown. It's pretty quick. The trick is, it's thrown quickly. The trick is having it fit. Okay, so one trick, if you want to make a living being a potter, you have got to come up with some little work system that, will expedite the process. So say, a lot of potters will say, I'm going to spend this week making mugs. I'm going to spend the next week making pitchers. I'm going to spend the next week making bowls. So I'm going to spend the 4th week making jars. I'm going to make a bunch of little jars. One way to expedite it, the process, so that you don't starve to death, because every piece is handmade, and you have to find a few shortcuts without compromising your aesthetic, is you make all the same. And another way is throwing off the hump. This is, what if you're throwing lids this small? That is so tiny. It's really hard to, you're not going to center a piece of clay that small. So this is a process called throwing off the hump. I did not center that very well at all. So you're really going to see throwing off the hump. What it is you have a big wedged piece of clay, and out of this I can throw a ton of lids. Okay? And how do I do that? Well, I just center a little bit of clay, just enough. So from here I'm just centering this much to throw the lid for this jar. And see, now my left hand's all full of slip, and when I come over here to check my measurement, I check it after every time, because this is not a precise instrument. And look, you can see that there's clay all over the little knob here, and they're either too tight or they're too loose, but they move. I mean, it's not a precise instrument. So I'm going to check this measurement. Every time I check my clay piece, I'm going to come over here and check it again, because this thing, see, now I've cleaned the clay off and it's moving really easily. So basically, I need a lid that's about that wide. I'm going to throw one of these, recessed knob, that's going to be about this wide. So not quite as wide as this, but wider than this. And so I'm only centering just the amount of clay I need from here up. And then my next lid I'll center a little bit more. Okay? I, like to keep that a little domed, because I'm probably going to dome the top of the knob. Top of the knob's going to be right here, and then I'm going to pull the side out. So I'm going to start with making the top of the knob, and then I'm going to come in and crunch it, make the stem of the knob, and then I'm going to pull out the sides. It's going to be really quick. That part's easy. The hard part is making it fit the opening. Okay? All right. Don't blink. Okay, top of the knob. You have to determine what size knob you want. Obviously, it's going to be determined by, this is sort of a hefty, squat little jar. And so I sort of want a bold lid. Knob, I mean. I don't know how bold this is. Okay, so there's the top of my knob. Okay, now I'm going to crunch in and make the stem of the knob. Push down on it a little bit. And you're also making aesthetic decisions. How tall do you want that stem? Do you want it squat? Do you want it taller? You do have to look at the jar. This completes the jar. So make it a little taller. But it's going to recess a little when you make the side. So if the knob goes off center a little bit, just come in with your fingers, bring that bad boy back on. Okay. Off center. Just bring your fingers, bring it back on. Now, just to remind yourself how wide the lid has to be, get your calipers and the measurement. So I don't have to come out much. There's like 1/4 of an inch on each side that I have to pull it out. So my finger's on the inside, creating this little gully here. And I'm going to pull out this ledge. This ledge is going to sit on the ledge of the jar. I'm going to check it again to see how much more. Make sure the calipers are the exact measurement you've got on paper. Come across the diameter of the jar, of the lid, right across the knob. Okay, so I didn't pull it out very much. If you pull it out too much, you can always trim it. So there's not a lot of steps here, right? Top of the knob, across the top, create the stem. Maybe you want to write these steps down. Again, I can't remember all of this, but you start with creating the top of the knob, come in and create the stem. You're making the little indentation where it gets its name, recessed knob. It's recessed in that little hole. And you pull out the lip. I think my calipers are moving here. Measure. Bring it over, right across the diameter. I'm being very timid today. I still have to pull it out some more. It's still a little small. Everybody following me? Good. So I can do two things. I can sort of push the little recess out a little. And, you don't want to make this part too thin. If you're making a cookie jar, I know you. You're in the cookie jar 100 times a day. Yeah, I'm looking at you. And if that's too thin, it's going to break, chip, whatever. So that's a little thin right there. Give it some heft. Is that a word? Heft. Measure it again. So this part that I'm measuring is the part that sits on the ledge of the jar. And we're doing all these different steps right on there now. We're going through all these steps to make sure the lid fits tight. Right from the beginning, from wedging. Same amount of clay, or same type of clay, same wedged mass for the lid and the jar. Okay. Now, how do we get it off of there? I don't think you've used your stick with the long slope yet. We've been using the short slope to make the shadow lines, right? Now you're going to use your long slope, and it acts as a good little cutter. So you're going to just eyeball it where the bottom of the lid is, make a mark, and you can actually cut it right off there, but if you flip it around to this curved part of the stick, the other end, and push that down and create like a little pad of clay upon which the lid's sitting. Then you can take your wire so that you don't, oops, got a little bit of water sitting in this gully, this little recess here. We don't want that. Okay, so we don't want to pick up the lid and warp it. So we cut the lid off of the pad that we made here. Oops. Or we try to. Then we actually cut the pad of clay off. And that way we can pick up the pad without damaging a very tiny and wet lid. Okay? So I'm going to sit this with this jar. And that's that puppy's lid. Okay? When we get to teapots, your worksheet's going to indicate that you should have, you really should make several lids, several handles, and several spouts when we get to teapots. So just wrap your mind around that. You can't go through all this work and get to the point where you drop the lid or the lid doesn't fit and oh my God, what am I going to do now? And it's too late. So when we get to teapots, which is basically a lidded jar with a handle that you've done on mugs and pitchers, and then we're going to learn how to throw a spout, you're going to have several lids, several handles, several spouts to play around with form and proportion and spacing and all of that. Okay? All right. So that's the recessed knob lid, lower left-hand corner of your sheet. The other lid that sits on a ledge is what? Curved inset. And what do you think that looks like? Look at it carefully. What is it? What? A dome. What else?
The opposite of what you just did. Instead of going down, it's up.
Okay, yeah, the curve is up instead of down. But what it, like, look at it without the knob. What is it?
Bowl.
It's a bowl. Who said that? Good girl. All it is a bowl. Look at it. It's a bowl. Okay, so now I've just centered while I was talking another little piece. This is when I open with a thumb. I told you there's a lot of potters might open with thumbs. It's the only time I do when I'm working this small. But you'll see potters open with thumbs rather than fingers. Okay, it's just a bowl, but it's a very, look at the curve, it's very shallow. One thing that beginners make a mistake of doing is they make a big old dome and it looks really silly. Look how shallow the curve is on your paper. Okay, so this one, you do not throw the knob. You're throwing the bowl and then you add the knob later. Okay, so, if I were making it for this jar, it's got to be that wide, okay? Now, what did we just say? We had a reminder of bowls. When you're throwing your bowls, you're still working on your bowls. There's extra clay down there to carve a foot out, so we have extra clay to compress. Well, now look how much clay we have to compress. So if you do not compress the bejeebs out of that bottom, you're going to get a crack. I had a friend who was in a jar making cycle. They call them cycles. I'm in my pitcher cycle. I'm in my teapot cycle. He was in his jar cycle. And every single one of his lids cracked from lack of compression. So, mistakes are okay if you learn from them. You learn from your mistakes, they're okay. The point is to not repeat them. So what he did after that, he was so mad. Wouldn't you, if you're trying to make a living? He took the end of a baseball bat. You know how it's curved? And when he would throw, like he'd get to this point, he'd take that little end of the baseball bat and he would really tamp it to compress the clay particles that way. That was a while ago. It's just a little trick I'll never forget. I've never adopted that trick. I just sit here and I compress and compress. So remember, on your bowls you have extra compression. Well, here you've got all this smushy clay that is going to prevent you from really getting a good compression. When your other piece, like when you throw the jar, you're very close to the bat and you're compressing against this hard bat. Right now you're compressing against mush, right? All right, so just for sake of time, since I'm not going to keep these anyway, I'm going to just make the bowl. It's just a shallow curve. It looks really silly if you make a big dome.
Now, for compression, how do you not make a dome and compress it? Like, I feel like when you're pushing down, like it should.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, I didn't go down very far. It wasn't very far, but nevertheless I had to compress and compress and compress. But I didn't, if you get a dome, you're just going down too far. Like when I made that initial indentation in that piece of clay, this is called throwing off the hump, and I centered a little piece of clay. I didn't go down very far at all because I know it's just a shell. Look at how it's just, look at the lid. It's just it just sort of spans the opening of the jar. You don't want it flat. That would look, see how flat this is? That looks really unsightly. This is one of my beginning jars. It's got so many problems, but it's great to show students how many problems it has. So it's so flat, it doesn't, aesthetically it doesn't look good. But that's a different kind of lid as well. Okay, so it's way too far out, right? You can also take a rib and you can sort of do a final compressing in the rib, and that also makes a nice, okay, so you're making it still, you're working on your bowls. No recurves in your bowls, right? Well, no recurves on the inside of this, so I just ribbed it with this rib and made a nice smooth transition. Remember, if you start your fingers in the beginning of your bowl, wet them a little bit, start at the beginning, come up, you should feel a smooth transition. No highs and lows and highs and lows. Those are called recurves. So the inside of this lid, this bowl-like lid, should have no recurves. Okay, so I'm way far out, so I have to trim it. And then I'll measure it again. And I'm always checking my measurement on the paper because these calipers are not very precise. Still about 1/4 of an inch off. And again, don't make it too paper thin. So now we're getting, you know, depending on your jar, you've got just the gentlest little curve here, right? Not much to it. Okay. I'm going to refine this edge a little bit. Measure it again. Looks really small, doesn't it? Right on now. Wow. It's there. Just trying to refine this lip a little. So, important thing to reiterate. Let's do it on this. You are measuring with the calipers when they are crisscrossed this corner right here, the exact diameter. Find the diameter but you're measuring in that corner that you made with the right angled rib. And remember, you're bending the lip out, you're not keeping it straight up. Now, it is the outer part of this lid that's got to sit right in that crease. Some of you are glazing over already. You with me? The outer part of the lid, right in there. This doesn't quite fit. This is sitting up on the ledge a little bit. It's got to fit that outer edge. So you're not measuring the inside edge. If you were, you would have your calipers crisscrossed. So there's no way you could measure it. But that's what's making it fit. Okay? It's this rim sitting right in there. Or if you're doing a curved inset, this is smaller. No, that's bigger. Sitting right in that ledge. It should not sit up on that part. You with me? Okay, so the stick with the longer slope, it's a great cutter. Come under, eyeball it so that you don't cut through. Make a cut, press down with the other end of it, make another cut. So then you can take your wire, cut the bowl or the little lid and the pad that's under it, and then you're not damaging the lid. Okay, so notice how shallow a curve it is. You don't want it flat, but you don't want it domed. Okay, so either one of those could be a lid for that jar. This one already has the knob. We're going to be trimming it. This one we have to make a knob. Again, it could be a pulled handle. You could have fun with them. They could be hand-built. They could be thrown and attached. You could throw a little knob off the hump and slip and score it on there. Okay. Questions on that? Those two lids go on the go on the jar with a ledge. So the handout you have with more variations are indeed just that, just variations of those two lids. Okay. So now we'll do the upper right hand one, the flange lid. This is a good lid for a teapot, because when you tip me over and pour me out, the flange is going to stay in the teapot and not fall out in your cup. Now this is an example of a flange lid, but it's a really short flange, so that would not be good for a teapot. We'll discuss that more at length when we get to teapots. So now this is going on a jar without an opening, or without a ledge. Okay? Obviously it has an opening. This old jar of mine, is a flange lid that has a little longer flange, but still not long enough for a teapot. I think we have one here. Well, that's still not too much longer either. The inside is a bowl, a nice curved bowl. What happened on mine is it's so flat on the inside. See, I didn't make a bowl on the inside. It's flat. But then I tried to carve enough away and yet try to give it a little bit of a curve, because it looks really awful if it's flat. But then I didn't carve enough away, so it split, it cracked because it's so thick. And who knows if I compressed it. But if you make a curved bowl on the inside, then it gives you a little bit of a dome on the outside without leaving excess clay. Okay? So, this is sort of the opposite. The jar now will not have no ledge. And it's the flange that's going to fit down in that hole. That one doesn't. The flange fits down in that hole, but this is too loose. This is not a good lid. It's a pretty little jar if you don't fuss with the lid, but it doesn't fit. It's not a good lid. But the flange fits down into the opening of the jar, and it's almost the opposite of this ledge. So when we made the ledge on this jar, we came down halfway across it with the right-angled rib, and then bent it out, right? On the flange lid, we're going to come halfway down the lip of the lid and bend it in. So we're almost like making the opposite ledge here. Are you following me? We're coming halfway down with the right angle rib, and we're bending this in, tilting it in, just like we tilted this out. So you might want to make those notes on your papers. Okay, so again, I just centered like from here up, just how much I needed. Gonna make my opening with my thumb. So I'm making a flange lid, and I'm going to now compress a nice bowl form on the inside here. But I'm keeping the lip sort of fat, right? Like I did on the jar, so that I have room to make a ledge. The ledge is not on the jar this time. You can say that the ledge is on the lid itself, if you want to think of it that way. So I'm compressing, but I'm also creating a nice shallow dome so that I don't have the issues I had with this flat lid. Plus, you want this lip to hang over. See how it's almost level with the lip of the jar? You want it to hang over a little bit. It's almost like a little hat, like the jar is wearing a hat. It just doesn't look right level with the lip. So there are many issues with that jar. Another issue is it weighs 500 pounds. It could act as a doorstop.
Fancy one.
Hmm?
Fancy one.
Yeah. I was really into like handles. Pulled handles and making all kinds of handles out of the handles. Alright, so sometimes, and it looks like this might be the time, even I have to, it might take me a few times to get the hang of this flange lid. I can tell now it's not going to go well. So, you know, so you have to make a few, you know? It's only dirt. Okay, so we took the right angle and we came down halfway on the inside of a fat lip to make this ledge, and then we bent it out. Now we're doing the opposite. We're going to be on the outside of this fat lip, pushing down, creating the lip of the lid and creating the flange at the same time. The length of the flange will depend on how much clay you have here, and I can see now that I've left practically no clay here to do this, so we might have to make another one. Okay? Alright, so again, get your boundaries, get comfortable. You're gripping the rib with all 10 fingers. My elbows are anchored in my side. I'm coming halfway across this lip and I'm pushing down. So here's the case where you know, again, if you don't have enough clay, you'll just, this ledge that I keep pushing down, that just might tear right off. Because there's not enough clay there. But it hasn't. Okay, so then, just like we tilted this ledge out so that it doesn't morph and grab onto the lid, we're gonna tilt this in. Now, so we've got a flange lid here with a very short flange. Whoops. See how that thing bent? Because it's very thin. Not good. But it's somewhat of a flange lid. So I would, if I had a nice jar, yes, see how it's, if you look underneath, it's really thin here. It's about ready to tear right off. So we do it again. But now we didn't make a jar for this, but this is what, let's pretend that this was the jar. How are we going to measure that opening? Crisscrossed or open calipers? Crisscrossed. And I'm bending over so I'm not getting the exact diameter. We're just sort of going through the motions here, okay? You with me? Pretend that's the diameter. Crisscrossed. I'm going to transfer it to my paper, right, immediately. Then I'm going to open them, right? Because then you always open them to measure the lid. Let's just pretend it was this open. That was that opening. You're coming exactly across the diameter of this flange. And again, we're human, we don't know exactly where the diameter is. So let's move it a few times. Let's check it. If it seems the same, it's this part right here. With me, everybody looking? This part right here, that's gonna fit right up against here. And that's what's gonna make that lid fit tightly with no movement. Right? So I'm gonna go around and check all your jars and I'm gonna jiggle your lids. Okay? So if you want this flange lid to fit, everybody with me? It's this part. It's not this part, it's not this part, it's this part that goes down in here and locks it in place. Does this fit? Okay, that looks stupid too though. But, you know, it's a better looking lid than that. And again, no, you know, we've talked about decorating in sections. You see how, you know, you can sort of make lines and decorate sections. This had so much clay in it, we just trimmed a knob out of it. It actually fits physically. It just doesn't go aesthetically. Looks really dumb. That's the flange lid. How do we cut it off? Okay, again, you know, you put a hand on the inside and eyeball the side so you don't go cutting through like, you know, like some of you have cut through your mugs, right? Or mugs. Cut through your bowls. Okay, make a little pad again. Cut off the lid. Cut off the pad so that you don't have to lift the lid and you don't want to mar it. Okay, so if this were a teapot though, the longer flange allows you to tip the teapot, pour somebody some tea, and that longer flange, we'll talk about it when we get to teapots, it grabs onto the opening of the jar and it doesn't go splashing or crashing into your teacup while you're pouring somebody some tea. That would be very rude. Okay, so longer flange for teapot. Okay, now what? Okay. This is one of my former students, Matt Heilich. He's the education coordinator at Baltimore Clay Works, a fine ceramic establishment in Baltimore, Maryland. he decided not to go to grad school and get his MFA, and he just wanted to make it as a potter, and he's very successful. And he was just on the cover, do I have it up there? He was just on the cover of Ceramics Monthly recently. Well, that was a picture of him sitting at the table for Baltimore Clay Works. But very successful potter, makes beautiful pots. My favorite lids for teapots, I mean, we're not doing teapots yet, I keep talking about them, but my favorite lids for teapots are the recessed knob lid and the flanged lid. Curved inset just falls right out. You're pouring your tea and it falls right out. So I don't do curved inset lids for my teapots. I'll do recessed knobs or flange because the flange holds it in. You know, a lot of times when, no matter what kind of lid, when I pour my tea, I just always sort of take my hand and just put it on the lid so it doesn't go crashing in. Because if you break your lid, that's it. I didn't recommend the rose jar lid either, but Matt loves the rose jar lids for his teapots, and so it's okay. He defied me, and it's okay. He's very successful. See, so always, you know, challenge your instructor. So the rose jar, it's an old English tradition. If you're looking at the picture, how would you describe the rose jar lid as well? Looking at your picture, the four.
Bowl.
It's also a bowl, isn't it? It's, how would you compare it to the curved inset bowl?
It's more like a cylinder bowl. It looks like it's not so like domey.
The curved inset lid, sorry, I now have a lemon seed in my mouth that I'm gonna have to spit out. That's good for the video, isn't it? Just a little extra. The curved inset lid is just a shallow curve. The rose jar lid has, like, it's a bowl, has sides on it. The rose jar lid does not have a knob. The English tradition is, this is the style of it. Now, the rule is, it doesn't have to have a knob if your hand can span it. So for instance, this lovely little knob, this lovely little handle. It's not in the video, is it? Or we'll do this one. This flange lid. My hand can span the lid, so I don't need a knob. You know, obviously if it's a big jar with a big flange lid, you know, you need a knob to get the lid off. So some of them can have a knob, they don't have to have a knob. The ones that have to have a knob, the curved inset has to have a knob. You can't grab a bowl. It would never come out of the jar. You need to have a knob. You might want to write that on the paper. The curved inset lid has to have a knob. Obviously the recessed knob lid the knob is thrown as part of the lid. But the two on the right, the flanged and the rose jar, don't actually have to have knobs. They can, they don't have to. But the rose jar though, never. That traditionally it does not. So the other thing about the rose jar, looking at the rose jar lid on the paper, what do you see? The ledge is not on the inside, the ledge is on the outside. So it's almost like when we made the flanged lid, making the ledge on the outside. Okay, so it's just a bowl but with sort of straighter sides. Okay, so then how do we trim these things? You wait till these are leather hard, and the jar is probably going to dry slower than the lid, so you got to pay attention to that. The lid's very tiny, so it's going to dry immediately. Okay? Maybe I'll save these to actually show you how to trim them on Tuesday. Let's just fake it with this. This is how some potters center their bowls. I've never had the nerve. I always do the old needle thing and move it, needle thing, move it. But you'll see like professional potters who throw 7 days a week. They'll just put it on there and go, and they knock it right on center. Believe it. Some people are so talented. Now, I wouldn't have to do this with this jar. I won't have to do that Tuesday because why?
Didn't cut it off.
I didn't cut it. I'm just doing this for demo. So we're pretending this is a wet jar. Well, leather hard. But, oh, okay, so again, these are so tiny, they are going to dry way faster than the jar, so you might have to cover the lids, letting the jar set up. But just leather hard. Okay, so pretend we, don't have one of these. Okay, we're just gonna pretend. Okay, so the recessed knob, it's going to fit in that opening, right? Because we measured it. It would, all right, look. This, it's going to fit in there, right? Because we measured it to fit in there. So when this is leather hard and the jar is leather hard, and I'll show you that Tuesday for just a refresher. So we're going to put it in there and we're going to lug it down again. Just pretend that it's sitting on the ledge, right? And you're going to take your little trimming tools, your R1 and your R2 that you've been trimming your bowls with, and you're going to trim a nice round, you're going to trim all that extra yuck off. See, like, this was not trimmed off. Oh, sorry, the scraping. Okay, I won't do that. Do it? No, my videographer, it's like running your nails down a chalkboard, sorry. And you're making a nice dome. That's the recessed knob. If it's the curved inset, right? Same thing. You're gonna put it upside, no, you threw it like this, the bowl. Now you're gonna put it right in there. With me?
That wasn't me. I did this.
Oh, no, but you with, oh, good excuse. I should remember that, have a turntable near me. Good one, Mitch. Trimming a nice bowl, okay? So if you accidentally had too much clay there, you could actually trim a knob out of it, but again, you're just trimming a nice bowl and then you could hand build a knob, pull a handle, whatever, throw a knob separately, attach it. You with me? For the trimming the recessed knob and the curved inset. Flange, same thing. Let's pretend this was, we threw it upside down, we put it in the opening of the jar. Because we haven't cut the jar off, so this is your instant, you know, chuck they call it. And you trim this nice and round, like we did for this one. This was a flanged as well. Trim it nice and round, put any embellishment, any carvings, whatever, handle, knob. Some curved inset lid has to have a knob. Rose jar lid never has a knob, you know, and all that. We've gone through that before. But knobs are sort of fun because they can be a decorative element. You know, people sculpt little animals and people and whatnot. Okay. Questions on any of those lids? So you're going to do a jar with each one of those lids and then take your favorite lid, and that's where you do your fifth one with your favorite lid. But sometimes you might have to make more than one lid because one might not fit, and you're going to hate to trash your jar because the lid doesn't fit, you know. So, I mean, you're just practicing. That's what we're doing. Beginning class is all practicing. So, you know, throw a jar and throw a couple lids for each jar. I mean, I could have done a much better, well, if I wanted a longer flange, sticking to the table, you know, I wanted a longer flange, this is about a minimal amount. I'd have to, I'd have to do another one. Okay? Questions? Ask me something. Okay, so if this were leather hard, in the jar, you peel off the pad, okay? Obviously, this is way too wet. But this is how you're going to be trimming. It's in the jar, it fits. That's the other thing, making a more than one lid. One's going to fit better than the other. Pretend I trimmed it nicely. Slip and score. Slip and score. Ah, nice, huh? That is one fine knob. What do you like, Katie? Beetles? Fireflies? What animal do you like?
I was just kind of doing a lot of different bugs and making
Bugs.
not really anything in particular.
I haven't seen any bugs on your pods.
I was just thinking about that for jars.
Yeah, do a bug for a knob, and then an accompanying carving on the jar. Do it, that's your assignment. Bug jars.
Gotta put little holes in them so they can breathe.
So, looking at your paper, let's look at the paper just so that you know. Because Katie's got to go a little step further. So we'll take a minute. So if you put, these are all very small lids, right? Looking at the paper where you see the wide casseroles. So I showed this casserole of mine to the beginning class last semester, and then two girls were like, I'm doing that now, and they did it. Well, we gotta go see the gallery. That's what we're gonna do. I don't know how many of you have gone to see the show yet, but we'll walk down there right now. We went with the other class last, we went with the hand building class. Oh, you want to tilt, oh, here. You show it tilted here.
Yeah.
So, a lid on a more cylindrical form is called a jar. On your other sheet where you have the more, like a lid on a bowl form, they would call a casserole. Now this is a step further. This is a tureen because it has a stem. This is what I did my BFA show on. It was called stemware. So everything on a stem. So just a bowl on a stem is called a compote. I mean, that's just the name of it. It's called a compote. So I made compotes, and then you put a lid on it. It could be a tureen, it could be a soup tureen. I carved a curve, a hole, semicircle out of some of the lids, and I even made ceramic ladles, and the handle came out of the lid and whatnot. But Katie, I'd like you to try maybe some wider casseroles. So, but one thing, that's when the curve, a lot of times, you make a bowl, and to make the casserole lid, remember, it is just a shallow curve for the lid. If it's really domed, it looks real silly. So, this is a little different too. I did this indentation, pulled handle, wove it around curved it around 3 times. It's just a little different thing here, but this is basically a curved inset lid. The ledge created on the lip, so you leave extra clay there. So that's, Katie's got casseroles and jars. You have just jars. However, like I said, 2 people last semester, 2 beginners, they're like, I brought this out, well, we'll go see them in the studio, in the gallery.
Is the stem on that thrown separately? Or
Yes,
one-
oh yes, let me, get this lovely apron off. So, I threw the bowl, measured it immediately, of course, through the lid. Then, when this was leather hard, the bowl was leather hard, recentered it on the wheel, just like you're recentering, recentering your bowls to carve a foot. I recentered it and I carved it completely round, no foot. And I threw the stem separately on another wheel, sort of halfway through it, attached it to the bowl, and then completely finished throwing it so that it was unified with the form of the bowl. Slipped and so it's almost like I slipped and scored a cylinder on here, and then continued to throw it to create the stem. You know, lots of trial and error. If it got too thin, it tilted in the firing because of vitrification, and I had casseroles like laning like this, you know. If this got too thin, this pushed through the bowl during vitrification. And then in here you saw a big dome. Actually, one of them will open the lid in the gallery. One of them, that happened to one of the girls. This design is just like you do your pie crusts. You know, how many of girls, are you not making pies? What?
I made pot pie.
Potters cook. Okay.